and welcome to this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. This week on the podcast, we're going to touch on the amazing career of Drew Brees, the latest news about the upcoming Arrowverse crossover and the major villain that is being brought into the Arrowverse on the CW, and more. With me, your host, Josh Hennig, right here on the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Topic number one on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I want to take some time and do a little bit more than a congratulations and a hat tip and all that kind of jazz to a guy who's not just had an amazing career. He's not just putting up big numbers, but in some ways it was really unexpected for Drew Brees to be where he is today. I want to touch on Drew Brees also because when you talk about the top quarterbacks of the last 20 years, it's 2018, so I kind of use the 1998 NFL draft. It's kind of like a demarcation for the modern era of quarterbacks because so many times in the last 20 years, we talk about Peyton Manning, we talk about Brett Favre, we talk about Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. If you're an NFC East fan, you talk about Donovan McNabb and Eli Manning. If you're a West Coast football fan, you're talking about guys like Phillip Rivers and Russell Wilson. If you're a Seahawks fan, you talk about Matt Hasselbeck. If you're a Cardinals fan, you talk about Kurt Warner and Carson Palmer. But the guy who doesn't get enough recognition is Drew Brees. And that's kind of been the story of his entire life. It goes back to his college career. Drew Brees was a second-round draft pick. And we'll get to what happened with the 2001 NFL draft in just a moment. But the guy was more than just a nice quarterback. He was the quarterback of Purdue. He led them to 3 bowl games with receivers who pretty much did nothing in the NFL. So he was not playing with elite talent. But in college, during his career, he threw for 90 touchdown passes and 45 interceptions. So he was double the touchdown to interception in college. So you already knew this was the start of something. You saw in college what he could be in the NFL. In fact, his first year as a full-time starter, he threw 39 touchdowns and 20 interceptions as a sophomore. And you look how he compared to the rest of the country. Every year as a starter, he was top 5 in the nation in passing yards. Every year at Purdue, he was top 10 in the nation in touchdown passes. He was even among the best in passing efficiency rating in the Big Ten during his time in college. And he was an all-around athlete, too. He was more than just a prolific passer. Drew Brees rushed for 14 touchdowns and caught 2 other touchdowns. So he was throwing the ball, he was catching the ball, and he was running the football to get touchdowns. In fact, his final season, when he put up the gaudy numbers that he did with the 26 touchdown passes, along with the 5 rushing touchdowns and 1 receiving touchdown, because he played for Purdue, a team that was never going to be the national conversation for a national championship, a team that lost a very close Rose Bowl game in his final season, he finished 3rd in the Heisman voting to 2 guys who would be in the national conversation because of their team's chase to be national champions. Those 2 being Chris Winkie, who won the Heisman, and Josh Heupel, who came in 2nd. But what differentiated Drew Brees from both of those guys was Drew Brees was elevating the talent around him, and it started in college. Josh Heupel and Chris Winkie played for elite college football programs with high-level talent. Drew Brees was not doing that. So when Drew Brees went into the draft process, people were hyper-judgmental of him on all the things that don't matter. His height, his hand size, his physical build, how fast he could run a 40-yard dash. Instead of judging him on his actual ability to play the game of football, instead of watching the tape and realizing he was taking guys who were not high-level talent in elevating their abilities on the football field because he was such a good quarterback. He dropped to the second round in the 2001 NFL Draft. And the 2001 NFL Draft is a very famous and infamous draft because of the fact that that was the year that the Atlanta Falcons traded up to get the number 1 overall pick to acquire Michael Vick. That year was a very interesting draft on multiple fronts because the talent in that draft, at least leading into the draft, was supposed to be one of the most deep drafts at the time. And you were coming off of the last couple of years where quarterbacks dominated many of the draft conversations. 1998, 1999, major quarterbacks picked the top of the draft. So you're only a couple of years removed from big names being a part of the draft. And for the Falcons, a franchise that lost Super Bowl a few years earlier, they were desperate to get a franchise-changing guy at the top of the draft. So the Falcons traded their first overall pick, which was 5th overall, along with a 3rd-round pick and a 2nd-round pick in the next year's draft, along with a unknown special teams receiver named Tim Dwight, to the Chargers for the 1st overall pick to acquire Michael Vick. And the Chargers were very calculated in this move because this draft was more than just about acquiring those draft picks, which, they didn't hit all home runs with those picks. One of the picks was a guy named Tay Cody who ended up doing nothing in the NFL. But it was about understanding that they felt they could still get the player they really wanted at 5th overall, so they didn't have to be 1st overall. So let Atlanta take Michael Vick, a guy who had a lot of potential, a phenomenal athlete, phenomenal physical tools, but was still not a polished product, draft him to jumpstart their franchise moving forward. Because the Chargers knew the guy they wanted would still be there at 5th, because the teams that were picking behind 1st overall, at number 2 it was the Cardinals, number 3 it was the Browns, and number 4 it was the Bengals. Those teams had specific guys that were targeting in the trenches. The Cardinals at 2nd overall select an offensive tackle, a really large, strong dude in Leonard Davis. Gerald Warren was considered one of the top athletes in the draft, 3rd overall by the Browns, and then Justin Smith, who actually ended up being the best of those 3 guys, 4th overall by the Bengals, a phenomenal all-pro caliber level defensive lineman who played in the league for about 14 years. The Chargers sat back and let the guy come to them. Future Hall of Famer LaDainian Tomlinson out of Texas Christian University. And at the time, you look at guys like Warren, went to Florida. Michael Vick went to Virginia Tech. They were considered so-called better prospects than LaDainian Tomlinson because people saw Texas Christian as this other school. They weren't watching the film. They were just relating the school to the player to the combine. Obviously, a lot has changed in sports now because we have guys like Josh Allen being drafted out of Wyoming and Carson Wentz being drafted out of North Dakota State. So you have a guy in Drew Brees who just continues to drop. And I remember watching this draft thinking, why on earth is Drew Brees dropping in this draft? The Chargers walked out of that draft with 2 future Hall of Famers, Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson. Not a bad haul for a team that gave up the 1st overall pick for a guy who, for all intents and purposes, Michael Vick never lived up to his potential and the expectations levied on him when he came out of college for various reasons, and it's not important getting into right now. So Drew Brees ends up going to San Diego, a franchise that realistically had only 2 good eras of their franchise. Outside of the 1 Super Bowl appearance, the Dan Fouts era was an era with a high-flying offense. And then years 4 in the early AFL days, they had another high-flying offense going on in the 1960s with also a Hall of Famer, Lance Allworth, at receiver. So you have Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson come into the NFL together. And the start of Drew Brees' career was really nothing to write home about. His first 2 years in the NFL, He threw 16 interceptions and 15 interceptions. He was not a prolific passer at the beginning of his career. Now, part of it was because he did have a learning curve to work up against, and also he was playing quarterback for an offense that just did not put up a lot of passing. It was not a high-powered offensive passing offense. So, in some ways, his skill set didn't really match Marty Schottenheimer's style of playing football. And also, he, you could argue, wasn't fully ready for the NFL game at 23 and 24 years old. Major reason why the Chargers went into the 2003 NFL draft and came out with Phillip Rivers. So in 2004, Drew Brees started to show the signs again that we saw in college. This undersized quarterback threw for 27 touchdowns and just 7 interceptions with a 65.5% completion percentage. 2005, another good season, but it was then that the issues with the injury to his shoulder started coming up, and the Chargers already were making plans to make Phillip Rivers the starting quarterback moving forward. So when Drew Brees hit free agency, there were questions about, is he damaged goods? He can still be a starting quarterback in this league. We know the story about the Miami Dolphins. They did not pass him in the physical, but the Saints did. So the Saints signed him, and the Dolphins did it back in the 2006 offseason. Since joining the New Orleans Saints in 2006, he has thrown 416 of his 496 passing touchdowns in his career. He has been a Hall of Famer just based on what he has done in New Orleans. Multiple seasons leading the NFL in passing yards and completion percentage, leading the Saints to a Super Bowl championship, having not one, not two, not three, but 4 seasons with over 5,000 passing yards, unheard of. And this past weekend, he broke Brett Favre's record for passing completions in a career. He already has 3 of the top 4 seasons of completion percentage for a quarterback. If he retired right now, he is the all-time leader in completion percentage for a career in NFL history at 67.1% completion percentage. Oh, and by the way, this year, 2018, at age 39, Drew Brees has an 80.6% completion percentage in just the first 3 games of this season. So why doesn't Drew Brees get talked about more? Well, part of it is because he's playing in a very quarterback-friendly offense. He's playing in a dome, so the conditions are very ideal for high-powered offenses. Also, he's played with a really good head coach. Sean Payton is a very smart, offensive-minded head coach. And while Drew Brees hasn't always played with the most elite talent, there was a long time there where Marcus Colston was the best receiver in New Orleans. Drew Brees is not the guy on the Patriots winning 5 Super Bowl championships. He's not the guy in the Papa John's commercials who won multiple league MVPs like Peyton Manning. He's not super fast and athletic like the Michael Vick or the RG3 coming out of college or the Cam Newtons. He wasn't even a first-round pick. He wasn't hyped enough to be a first-round pick. But what he has done is just be consistent and productive from the moment he got to New Orleans. When Sean Payton hitched his wagon to Drew Brees, those two have rode a wave that has rode Drew Brees into the record books. He only needs 4 more touchdowns for 500 in his career, and he could finish his career as the all-time passing yards leader, passing touchdowns leader, and more. I don't think we give, as sports fans, enough credit to Drew Brees, a model of consistency in the NFL, a guy who just year in and year out is not just one of the most productive quarterbacks, but one of the most potent passers in the NFL. And even though the offense, yes, it is conducive to allow him to have that success, I mentioned this last week on the podcast about Carson Wentz. It's the decision-making ability, the ability to process information that differentiates the regular NFL quarterback from the great quarterbacks. Drew Brees is so good at processing information, at decision-making, about putting his teammates in a position to be successful. You don't throw for over 5,000 yards as many seasons as he has and not understand what you're doing. You don't have to have a completion percentage if you're a bad decision maker or you're bad at processing information. Yes, Tom Brady hit the Super Bowl rings, but the Super Bowl is a team accomplishment more than a single player accomplishment. Yeah, Peyton Manning has the MVP awards, but in some ways you could argue that Peyton Manning was surrounded by better talent for the majority of his career compared to Drew Brees. So that talent helped him maybe look a little better than he really was. You also can't hold against Drew Brees the fact that he has losing seasons on his record. He has 5 losing seasons in his career. And a major reason for that is because he's played on a lot of teams where the defense was horrible. So, yeah, he's putting up all these points. He's throwing 30, 40 touchdowns a year, but his defense is also themselves allowing 30, 40, 50 touchdowns a year. So the defense is not on the same level as the offense. So many times Drew Brees is throwing his team back into games to keep them competitive. So again, because football is a team sport, we overrate stats like wins and losses. But yet you realize if you dig deeper into Drew Brees' numbers, the completion percentage, the low interception, the touchdown rate, Drew Brees is 6th in NFL history in leading teams on fourth quarter comebacks. He's 6th all time. He has 30 of them. And the guys ahead of him, they're among the greatest to ever play the game of football. Peyton Manning's at the top of the list. He played on some teams that had some poor defenses too, but he played with some Hall of Fame caliber wide receivers as well. Tom Brady, we know about Tom and his prolific fourth quarters. Johnny Unitas, arguably one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever live. He played in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Dan Marino, another one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And then right ahead of Drew Brees, Drew Brees only needs 2 more to pass him. John Elway, famous for some of the biggest comebacks in playoff history as well. That's what we're talking about. Drew Brees is not some anomaly. Drew Brees had to earn everything he's gotten and more. He has put up the numbers, the success, and the pedigree to be mentioned among the best of all time. And I'm glad that I got to see the evolution of Drew Brees' career from his time at Purdue to his time with the Chargers to the last 12 plus years in New Orleans. It's been an incredible ride to watch, to see this guy who's now 39 years old have the incredible football life that he has had. And I think when he eventually does get in the Hall of Fame, whether that's 6 years or 10 years from now, whenever that is, I'm going to look forward to that speech because I want to hear from Drew how he views his football journey. Because I saw the Drew Brees that you're seeing for the last 12 years in college. Those 3 years at Purdue, he was a phenomenal quarterback. He was amazing to watch on a team that was below the standard of excellence in college football at the time. He was always the best player on the field. He brought that ability to elevate to the NFL. He maximized that ability with the Saints, and he's going to go down not just holding all these records, but himself being among the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the position. Enjoy it while you can, because someday these great quarterbacks are going to be retired and long gone. And you won't get the efficiency from Drew Brees from everyone else. Because there's a lot of guys who cannot process information and who lack the accuracy and precision that Drew Brees has. Topic number 2 in this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. The news came out that you are going to have a character that we've never seen on the CW's Arrowverse before. We've seen immortal characters like Vandal Savage. We've seen uber powerful characters. But we have not seen a character like the Monitor in this universe. The last time we saw a character of this kind of power was on Smallville. But the Smallville universe is so far removed from the current iteration of CW's universe. I don't think it's even fair to say it's in that conversation. So we haven't seen a character of this type of power introduced before. And there's two major significant aspects of this. One is the actor who's playing him, LaMonica Garrett. LaMonica Garrett is a guy who has played a lot of roles. He's received nominations for awards for some of his roles. Some of those roles include Deputy Sheriff Kane on Sons of Anarchy, Mike Ritter on Designated Survivor. And the reason why this is a big deal is because Garrett is so good of an actor, is so talented of an actor, he is able to embody characters on a very deep and intricate level that if you didn't know it was him playing this role in this upcoming show, you might not know it's him. And that's significant because when you're playing uber powerful characters, the actor cannot overshadow the character. One of the mistakes that some of the movie franchises out there have made over the years is that some of the characters that they have put into these roles have almost overshadowed the character they're playing. Like, for example, Sebastian Shaw, played by Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon's a great actor, but Kevin Bacon is so well known that it was hard to get past seeing him on the screen and realizing what kind of villain he was. That was probably a bad casting move, because what you're doing is you're taking a character who is very unique, very distinct in his power set, his nature, and his character, and having him portrayed by an actor who is extremely unique unto himself for all the roles he has played over a 30-year period. So that was not a great casting move. Whereas on the flip side, Christian Bale was an excellent casting move for the Batman movies, because Christian Bale so intricately and deeply embodies a character and plunges himself into playing of that role that you forget that who the actor is playing the role at times when you're watching it. And that's the difference. That's where Garrett, I think, is an excellent casting move, because the second point of this is you're introducing a character in the Monitor to the CW universe, a character who in the comics, the Monitor is one of two forces of nature that oversees the multiverse in DC Comics. And he basically is a personification and wielder of all energies in the universe. And he's been involved in several different conflicts in comics. The infamous Crisis on Infinite Earths incident, where he versus the Anti-Monitor went to war and destroyed half of the multiverse. You have another incident where he becomes corrupted and becomes the Dark Monitor, and people have to fight to stop him from destroying the entirety of the multiverse. And you're taking a character who has limitless power potential. There's no cap of like he's gonna get tired if he extends too much energy. No, you literally are talking about a character, when written a certain way, is basically unbeatable. In order to portray that properly on a show with a lot of grounded characters for the most part, even Supergirl and Superman on this show are in some ways depowered compared to their comic book counterparts. To have a character of this ridiculous amount of power is going to be very, very interesting to see how they portray him and what exactly the role of the Monitor is going to be here. Is he the villain? Is he part of the solution? Is he part of the problem? We know that he has been mentioned before in passing on the CW. I'm going to assume that this is another sign that this crossover event is going to happen on Supergirl's Earth 38, because I've mentioned this before. It's going to be very difficult to explain how there is a vigilante hero in Gotham that has not been mentioned on Arrow, when we already know there's been vigilantes mentioned on Supergirl in other cities. And also, when you're casting some of the characters that are going to be appearing on this show, it's going to be very hard to say this is part of the primary Earth, which is where the Flash and the Arrow and the Legends of Tomorrow exist. So if you're taking them away from the original Earth and forcing Supergirl, Batwoman, and others to deal with a multiversal threat on their Earth, I think it it allows you with more a little bit creativity when it comes to the character. Now, the only concern I have with this crossover event, which is being referred to as Elseworlds, which in Elseworlds was a line of comics in DC. It was an alternate reality take on numerous characters and their stories and their backgrounds. I don't know if they're going to go that deep into a 3-night event in creating total alternate universes, especially when we've already had an alternate Earth where the heroes are the villains are the heroes, which was basically the center point of last season's crossover. I think this Elseworld may have something a little more to do with kind of like a repercussion of last season's Crisis event. And I think that what you're going to see is it's going to take more than just brute force and brute strength to win the day. Because if you're introducing a character in Batwoman to your universe, she can't just be on another planet. I think that would be too complicated. She has to have a larger connection to Supergirl's Earth and to the other heroes than just saying, well, there's this big bad guy named the Monitor out there, and here's Batgirl. No, there's got to be more substance to it about what Earth is she from? Is she from Earth 38? Is she not from Earth 38? Is the Monitor the multiverse Monitor, or is he only the Monitor from one Earth? There's all kinds of questions that have to be answered, but I think that including a character like the Monitor is fascinating because he is one of the most powerful characters in all of DC Comics. You know, by comparison, he is more powerful in DC Comics than what Thanos is in Marvel Comics. Just on pure ability and potential, I would say the Monitor would wipe the floor with Thanos, even if Thanos had the Infinity Gauntlet, because Monitor is basically drawing power and energy on the entirety of the universe around him. That's very different than manipulating reality, which is in some ways the premise behind Thanos' use of the Infinity Stones, is that manipulating reality and making certain changes permanent. Whereas the Anti-Monitor, he is one with reality and he's constantly absorbing, drawing everything around him. I think that having a character of this power set is going to take more than just, all right, well, here come the big guns to defeat him. You're going to need a little bit more brain, skill, and strategy, and that maybe is where characters like Oliver Queen's Arrow as well as Catherine Kane's Batwoman involved. You're going to need a little bit more of stealth and just pure figuring things out in order to make this work, and maybe that's why this team up involves as well Supergirl, Arrow, and Flash, because you're going to need more intellectual and stealth ability than just pure strength and brute force in order to defeat a threat such as the Monitor would present to not just one Earth, like Earth 38 of Supergirl's, but to any multitude of Earths in the CW universe. Topic number 3 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Clemson quarterback Kelly Bryant, a senior on that football team, also who was the backup quarterback on Clemson's national championship team from a couple seasons ago, has announced this week that he is leaving Clemson and transferring elsewhere to finish his collegiate football career. You know, many times in sports, there's been a lot of athletes who have transferred because they either lost a competition or because the situation wasn't ideal for them. And I put it out on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook last night about the fact that recently there's been a handful of athletes who are making specific decisions about their futures. Kelly Bryant is now the 4th athlete in recent weeks to make major decisions to want his situation to be changed. Joining him is Le'Veon Bell, is still boycotting the Steelers because they didn't give him the contract he wanted. He believes he deserves to be paid way more than he is currently being paid by the Steelers. And then you have Devin Modster, the quarterback who lost the competition with the other 2 quarterbacks at UCLA, is now transferring to a junior college so he can not lose eligibility and keep playing. And unlike the other 3, I believe Kelly Bryant has a legitimate dispute. There's a fine line between wanting a better situation and wanting what one believes is they deserve. There's a difference between that and quitting because the situation isn't ideal. And I look at a guy like Kelly Bryant. This is the young man who waited his turn to play. He sat behind Deshaun Watson, helped put Clemson in a position to have another conference championship, to make another college football playoff, 16-2 as the starter of the Clemson Tigers. Everything was lined up for Kelly Bryant to lead Clemson to potentially an undefeated season this year. And then Dabo Swinney, the head coach of Clemson, who before this recent season I had a lot of respect for and I thought very highly of, made the decision to have an open quarterback competition between his senior starting quarterback, Kelly Bryant, and freshman Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, a highly recruited player, has a lot of skills, a lot of talent, and some people argue maybe a better quarterback prospect than Kelly Bryant. And the theory is that in recent years we've seen a lot of younger players take the jobs of seniors. We've seen that happen in Alabama with Jalen Hurts losing his job to Tua Tagovailoa. You saw in recent times at many schools now over the years, the younger players tends to get the opportunity if they're good enough, which I'm fine with that. I don't have an issue with that. I'm all for competition. But I think Dabo Swinney manipulated the situation with Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant. I believe he made Kelly and Trevor believe they were in a competition, but I think the situation was set up for Trevor to be successful and for Kelly to be at a disadvantage. You see, this is not a situation where the younger player is definitely better than the older starter. This isn't in a situation with Tua and Jalen in Alabama where Tua is definitively a better athlete, a better quarterback, a better player than the older Jalen Hurts. When you go back and watch the Georgia Tech game where Trevor Lawrence broke out and had an excellent game for the Clemson Tigers, you see all the plays that Bryant was on the field versus all the plays that Trevor Lawrence was on the field. It's as if they were running different offenses. It's as if Dabo Swinney and the Clemson offense did not trust Kelly Bryant to run a certain offense. So while the stats may be skewed, Trevor Lawrence with 9 touchdown passes, Kelly Bryant with 2, that's an unfair assessment because of the fact that Lawrence and Kelly Bryant in many ways weren't even running the same offense on the field. Kelly Bryant wasn't given the same opportunities to throw the ball and put on a passing display that Trevor Lawrence was given. Now, I understand the excuse may be that the Clemson coaches may think that Trevor Lawrence is more capable of running such an offense versus Kelly Bryant. But even then, that's a bit of an insult because you can coach a player up. Kelly Bryant is not stupid. He's not illiterate. He's not someone who is just totally incapable of leading a team and running an offense. I think Kelly Bryant has been typecast. I think because his skill set is as more of a scrambling quarterback and less of a predominant pocket passer. I think that the Clemson coaching staff believed that he had limitations that they felt that he couldn't overcome. And that Dabo Swinney felt that his best chance to win a national championship was with Trevor Lawrence and not Kelly Bryant. And that even of itself is also unfair because there's nothing in Kelly Bryant's background to say that Kelly Bryant can't win a national championship. He has the athleticism. He has the arm strength. He has the knowledge of the offense. He has all the abilities to go out there and play a quality football game. But when Clemson sent Trevor Lawrence out versus Georgia Tech, to go 13 for 18 on passing and throw 4 touchdowns, while Kelly Bryant was only out there for 6 out of 10 attempts on the field. While Trevor Lawrence was getting significantly more playing time, Kelly Bryant was on the sideline wondering, when do I get my chance to play? When do I get my turn in the offense? When do I get my opportunity? Kelly Bryant was misled by Dabo Swinney. This was never a quarterback competition. This was we are slowly introducing Trevor Lawrence into our offense so he can become our starting quarterback. This was a predetermined situation. And while many times I feel like the quarterbacks and other players who lose their starting job, they're leaving these programs because they're basically saying, well, the situation isn't what I wanted. It isn't ideal, so I'm going to leave. I think Kelly Bryant feels like he was wronged by Dabo Swinney, and I have to agree with him. And the reason why this is significant, and I wanted to talk about this, is because we've gotten to a point in sports where people are confusing competition for respect. These are two different issues. Clemson never afforded Kelly Bryant the same opportunities that they gave to Trevor Lawrence to be successful on the football field. Because Clemson wants Trevor Lawrence to be successful, and Kelly Bryant, I felt they thought that they believed in their heart of hearts that he was not capable of doing what they think Trevor Lawrence can do on a football field. And that's unfair to the athlete. Let the athlete prove that one way or the other. Don't make that decision for him. You have a young man who was committed to your program from day one, sat behind your superstar starting quarterback in Deshaun Watson. He could have gone to some other program and played probably immediately. He could have gone to a program like a South Carolina, or he could have gone to a program like a Kentucky, a Vanderbilt, an Indiana, a Purdue. He could have gone even to Florida, to South Florida, or Florida Atlantic, or Florida International. It's not like Clemson was his only option. But he said, I want to be part of this program. And he committed to it. And he earned his opportunity to be the starting quarterback his junior year. And he became one of the major leaders in that locker room for that football program. He became a representation of what, at least what I was told by Dabo Swinney, what Clemson football was all about. I heard Dabo Swinney say it last year in 2017. It was how Kelly Bryant represents everything good about Clemson football. But now all of a sudden he's not good enough? What he did, who he is, isn't good enough for Clemson because you have a fresh, shiny, new car in the driveway, so you're just going to forget about the car? They put on all those miles and got you to the point where you could get the new shiny car? If Kelly Bryant didn't extend the competitive window of the Clemson football program, who knows if Trevor Lawrence would still have gone to Clemson? You know, Clemson 8 years ago was considered a joke. When a football team choked in college football, it was called Clemsoning. Because before Deshaun Watson ever came along and had the enormous success for Dabo Swinney, the Clemson program was known for coming up short on the biggest stages. In the big games versus Florida State and Texas Tech and South Carolina and Miami and other schools, Clemson would come up short. In the conference championship game, they would come up short. In the big bowl game matchups, they would come up short. They were a punchline. Deshaun Watson changed all that. And Kelly Bryant learned about winning at Clemson. Kelly Bryant learned about the culture that Dabo Swinney wanted to instill through Deshaun Watson to the rest of the team. Kelly Bryant was the flag bearer for that moving forward. And Dabo immediately wanted the newer, nicer car. Dabo was no longer interested in the car he already had that got him to and from work every day without the frills. Okay, so Kelly Bryant doesn't have the premium leather seating and the built-in navigation system with the big maps. But he was still a very good college quarterback. Trevor Lawrence may aesthetically look more like a quarterback than Kelly Bryant. He may have a skill set that allows him to be a very competent quarterback. And I can't judge him too harshly because Trevor Lawrence has played in only a handful of college football games. I'm going to take the games against Georgia Tech and Georgia Southern seriously. Even against a team like Georgia Southern, a lower level school that has much lesser quality athletes than Clemson, Trevor Lawrence had a touchdown interception. But because he threw 4 touchdowns versus Georgia Tech, a football program that has not produced high caliber talent to the NFL level outside of a handful of players in the last 20 years, versus Texas A&M, that was Kelly Bryant who led the offense for the majority of that game. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence had 1 touchdown pass in the game. Now, I understand that we're not at practice. We don't see what's going on behind the scenes. We're not there each and every day to see what is happening at practice, what the players are saying, what the coaches are observing of the player in between plays. But I'm watching the same game these coaches are. Trevor Lawrence has had the majority of his success against Furman, Georgia Southern, and Georgia Tech. All programs with average to below average talent for the Division I level of college football. Kelly Bryant has 12 wins last year as a starting quarterback against some of the best teams in college football. I think Trevor Lawrence is an interesting prospect, but I think Dabo Swinney made the wrong idea. Trevor Lawrence may be the future of Clemson's football program. He may be someday an NFL quarterback and get drafted, but they overlooked the value of a veteran leader in that locker room for 2018. And Trevor Lawrence is probably going to cost them a game somewhere, because if he's going to throw an interception against Georgia Southern, what on earth is he going to do against other teams? Clemson has a very difficult schedule ahead of them moving forward. Their first 4 games, the hardest was at Texas A&M. And even Texas A&M is not a high-level football program right now. They're on a rebound. They're on the comeback. They got to face a tough Syracuse team that's going to fight them tooth and nail this upcoming weekend. And then 3 weeks from now, they got to go to a Florida State program that is still trying to find its way. And Clemson better hope they don't find their way when Clemson comes to town, because there's still a lot of talent on that Florida State football team that can take advantage of a young inexperienced quarterback like Trevor Lawrence. Boston College is not a pushover this year. Duke went to Northwestern and beat them earlier this year. And then you have the in-state rivalry versus South Carolina, a coach in Will Muschamp that would love to get some revenge for what happened in the last couple of years with that football program. This is not an easy schedule ahead for Trevor Lawrence. I would not be surprised if he struggles for a couple games, and he may lose them a game, all because the coach was more enamored with the shiny new car than the car that got him to the point where he could afford to get the shiny new car. There is no Clemson football as we know it today if Kelly Bryant didn't carry the standard set by Deshaun Watson before him. Dabo Swinney is a guy I have a lot of respect for, I think very highly of, but in this situation, I think he's 110% wrong, and I'm glad Kelly Bryant is taking advantage of the NCAA rules, transferring out of that program, and I hope he goes somewhere where he is allowed to flourish in a way that he was not allowed to at Clemson. Whether he goes to a program like UCLA or Oregon, maybe even a Utah, in Arkansas, with his former offensive coordinator Chad Morris over there. Wherever he goes, I hope he has a great season, because I think Kelly Bryant is still a very talented quarterback. He's a strong arm. He's a leader. He's a phenomenal athlete. I don't know if he's an NFL quarterback. I don't think he's that kind of talent level to be able to fit within what the NFL is looking for in quarterbacks. But I think for one more year, he can be a very good to excellent college football quarterback. And I hope the best for him moving forward. Topic number 4 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast, the Dark Phoenix full feature trailer was released this week. And this is probably going to be the final movie of the X-Men universe under the Fox banner for two reasons. One, because with Disney purchasing the Fox studio properties that include X-Men, Fantastic Four, and all related entities, this is the last movie that was currently already in production that will be finished before the actual completion of the acquisition of Fox Studios by Disney. And the second reason this is probably the last one is actually in the trailer itself. They actually use a song where they're singing "This Is the End." And it looks like the studio, along with director Simon Kinberg, wanted to take the X-Men universe somewhere they just haven't done before. And Simon Kinberg said that recently in an interview, that they wanted to introduce elements that were never touched on before in any movies. Similar to how Deadpool and Deadpool 2 were pushing the limits when it came to breaking the fourth wall, making fun of other movies and other Marvel characters. And so what you see in the trailer is a retelling of the history between Professor Xavier and Jean Grey. And they shows in the movie a different history of Jean Grey, that she kills her parents, it looks like, whether it was by accident or purpose, we'll have to find out when we see the movie. Charles Xavier basically puts some blocks on her mind, whether it is keeping from her the memory of her killing her parents, or it's putting dampeners on her mind from understanding how powerful she really can be, because he wants her to grow up and learn how to control her powers on a limited scale before she could tap into them on a larger scale. And you see that the team, as it states in the synopsis, they go to space, she's exposed to some cosmic energy. It's probably something about the cosmic energy unleashes the full fury of the Phoenix Force in her. Now, for those who don't know, the Phoenix Force is a cosmic entity on the same level of power and just sheer force as is Galactus, cosmic entities of eternity and death, and the Living Tribunal. All these cosmic entities have been around for millennia and are basically a step below the Marvel omnipotent, omnipresent God known as the One Above All, who set the universe into motion, and these cosmic entities kind of function as secondary gods under the One Above All's domain. And the way it works in Marvel is that the Phoenix Force is one of the forces of nature that is involved in the death and rebirth of civilizations. There's tons of stories in the comics about the Phoenix Force, how it's been manipulated, how it's been used, how it's been, just all kinds of different things have going on with the Phoenix Force, because the Phoenix Force is basically a force that is fueled by emotion. It is fueled by emotions like love, hate, anger, different types of passion. So we're talking about a character, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts before, that is on that Omega level power base with limitless potential of power. And so you have Jean Grey having to come to grips with the power she has, how to manipulate it, how to control it, and probably in some ways she's also dealing with the fact that the Phoenix Force is taking over her mind and her body as it does in the comics. Now, the trailer also infers two other things. One, it looks like somebody dies in the trailer, which I'm going to assume it's Jennifer Lawrence's character Raven, also known as Mystique, because that would probably be the easiest way to cause a intense divide between Charles Xavier and Dr. Hank McCoy. And as you see in the trailer, there's a point where Hank McCoy takes sides with Magneto. I'm not going to say it's an X-Men versus Brotherhood of Mutants deal, but I do believe that Beast joining Magneto's side is definitely a callback to a part of the comics where Beast does join the quote-unquote bad guys out of anger at Charles Xavier. Now, of course, the reason why he did it in the comics has totally nothing to do with this storyline, so we're not even touching on that topic. But the point is that there's a lot of elements from the comics that seem to be worked into this storyline already. And I do expect that this is going to be the movie that's going to probably put a bow on top of all the X-Men movies, because Marvel already came out and said that in the acquisition of the Fox Studios that they were not going to stop any in-production filming. So if a movie was already in production, if a movie was already going through the stages of we've selected actors, we already have a script, we've already started filming, we've already started pre-production, then Marvel said, look, we're not going to stop any of those projects. But what Marvel said is that anything that is not already in the process of being produced, we're actually not going to proceed with those projects. So we knew from the beginning that this current X-Men movie was going to get done. There's some conflicting reports about, though, what the future holds for New Mutants. I think as of right now, it looks like that film will get made, and that is in some ways a sequel to Deadpool 2. But outside of this X-Men movie and the New Mutants, it looks like that will be the last of the Fox movies that gets produced and distributed. Historically, Marvel has shown us with their movies that even with the Spider-Man movies, they basically dismiss any movie that came before it. So the two iterations of Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield, as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe is concerned, they never existed. When you look at a movie such as the Eric Bana Hulk movie, I think it was from 2003, Marvel treats that movie as it never existed. The Captain America movie from the late 80s, early 1990s, that movie never existed. So what basically Marvel is doing is that they're treating anything that is not under their banner as not just not being part of canon for their films, but they're not even part of any history at all. They're not even referred to. They're not even touched on. They're not even acknowledged, to the point that you even look at a character like the Punisher, who's had 2 movies where he ever showed up in Netflix shows, a character in Daredevil who had a standalone movie and then a spin-off movie in Elektra. All of those movies are still treated like they're not ever have happened. So whatever you see in this X-Men Dark Phoenix movie, I think it's fair to assume that the people who have been producing X-Men in the Fox universe, they didn't want to hold back. They wanted to go all in, 110%, and do anything and everything they could to make a movie. This was the last chance they had to make. And I think that's why the villain in this movie, who has loosely been referred to as Smith, I think is a Skrull. And the reason why Fox can get away with that is because as part of the acquisition of the Fantastic Four and X-Men properties over 20 years ago for their movies, the Fox universe was given the opportunity to use these Skrull characters. And we've seen before already that you have characters in both the Fox universe and in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've already seen that with Quicksilver. 2 different Quicksilvers, 2 different universes. And I think it's going to be the same deal now with Smith playing a Skrull. And the reason why I think she's a Skrull is because she seems very manipulative. She seems like somebody who's coming in to try to sway the Dark Phoenix to join her cause. And that also goes along with the comics, because there was a villain named Mastermind who manipulated Jean Grey in the comics to leave the X-Men and join another group of mutants in their cause. And we've also seen Jean, because of her connection to the Phoenix Force in the comics, be a part of cosmic conflicts involving the Shi'ar Empire. So there's a possibility you could see some Shi'ar Empire in this movie as well. Maybe the reason why they go to space in the first place is because of the fact that maybe there's something involving the Shi'ar Empire fighting the Skrulls that initiates the X-Men's, I don't want to say desired involvement, but their willingness to be involved in something in outer space. I think the other thing I take away from this trailer is that I think it's becoming more and more apparent that while I know a lot of people who loved the X-Men movies of the early 2000s were massive fans of Famke Janssen playing Jean Grey in all the movies that she did, not just in the 3 X-Men movies, but also the Wolverine movies after the fact. I think Sophie Turner is showing that she is actually going to be a better Jean Grey than Famke Janssen was. And the reason why I say that is because Famke Janssen always seemed like she was conflicted and unsure of herself and awkward at times. And almost like her character, not Famke Janssen, but the character she was portraying was almost trying too hard to be normal. Whereas Sophie Turner seems to be trying to learn about herself. Her conflict seems to be a lot more natural and a lot less forced on the audience. I think one of the reasons why Sophie Turner has learned how to do this role so well is because she has years of experience playing a character on Game of Thrones. And when you're playing a character on a television show with that type of production, with that type of attention, with that type of storytelling, it's a lot easier to transition from embodying a character in one universe to the embodiment of a character in another universe in a way that is not awkward, in a way that is not pretentious, in a way that comes across as much more of a classical interpretation. I'm not trying to diss Famke Janssen, but if you go back and realize where her career was before the X-Men movies, what she had done before portraying Jean Grey was nowhere on the level needed to understand how to portray a character that has a cult following. Sure, she had played in some movies that gained her attention, but she was never a character on the level that Sophie Turner has learned how to play in Game of Thrones. So when Sophie Turner is going through this acting role of a character who's having to find themselves, learn their place in the universe, learn who they can and can't trust, embody someone who, for all intents and purposes, can do anything they want, but they don't. These are all traits that I don't think Famke Janssen fully understood how to portray. Again, not because she's a bad actress, because I think that her background limited her from understanding the depth and the impact of the character that she was asked to portray on the big screen, whereas Sophie Turner has a lot more experience in portraying that character type. And she's able to look at the comics and say, oh, I recognize these elements of this character of Jean Grey. Whether she read a comic, whether she saw a television show, whether she saw a movie, whether she just read the script, whatever way that she indoctrinated herself into the Jean Grey character, I believe that she looked at it and say, there are characteristics of this character that I recognize because of my experience on Game of Thrones. And I think that's one of the reasons why she may never be the most popular of the women who play the Jean Grey Phoenix character on the big screen. But I think that when we go back and watch these movies 10, 20 years from now, I think we're going to realize that her version of the character was much more in touch and in tune with the original intent of the character than Famke Janssen was at any point in time, especially considering her age, how that lines up with the story, how her age lines up with the original storytelling of Jean Grey in the comics. And I think that Marvel's going to realize that when they get the X-Men characters, they're probably going to do a lot less of the origin storytelling, because they're going to realize that these stories have already been told. And I think that that is why 10, 20, 30 years from now, when we look back on this Dark Phoenix movie, we're going to realize that Sophie Turner has done an excellent job at portraying a character as close to the original intent of the character as possible. Now, again, I'm making this judgment from a trailer. Obviously, when the movie comes out, we will do a review here on the podcast. But for now, I'm very fascinated by the direction they're going with this movie. I believe at least one main character is going to die. I think Sophie Turner is going to be the star of this movie, hands down. And I think you're going to see a side of the X-Men that is going to create a lot of conflict and a lot of discussion when it comes to the portrayal of superheroes on the big screen, because they're going down a path of this movie that has a lot of character elements that have never been touched on in the X-Men universe, or in even any Marvel characters in general, of basically, blurring that line between who the good and the bad guy is. Because in Marvel Comics, there's always a defined line between who's good and who's bad, whereas I think between the Netflix television shows as well as this upcoming X-Men movie, The Dark Phoenix, you're going to find a lot more character development and the character investigation. Instead of it just being clear, this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, it's going to have you take some time to question, all right, is this person may be a good guy, but are they doing the right thing? Did they pave a road of good intentions on their way to creating hell on earth? So I think there's going to be a lot of questioning, a lot of deeper investigation in the characters, a lot of character development, and it's going to be interesting because whatever this movie does, like I said, I think Marvel is going to treat it as, we're not going to do this again. We're not going to replicate in this movie again. We're going to treat all of these movies, the X-Men movies, just like they did with the Daredevil and Punisher and the Captain America movie. They're going to treat all those movies as they never existed. And be prepared for that, because I think that's something that people kind of figured they were going to do with the Spider-Man movie. But the X-Men movies, you're talking about a history of a franchise that has been doing what they've been doing with all these X-Men characters for 18 years now. And what Marvel is basically going to do when they get these movie property rights back and when they start developing their characters in their own universe, they're literally going to be telling you everything you saw before doesn't matter, didn't exist, forget it, this is the real story. And I think that's going to be hard for some people to accept at first, because people have spent 18 years invested in these specific telling of characters. And I think that's another reason why Sophie Turner is going to have a lasting impression on people, because you may never see this version of this story involving the X-Men ever again. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this week's topics, you can drop in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the information I bring you each and every week on the podcast, hit that like button below and subscribe and catch the podcast each and every week. I'm Josh Hennig, your host. This is the Mutant Blitz Podcast, where I bring you my thoughts and perspective on different stories from around the sports and comic book TV and movie universe. Catch you next time.